In the shadow of York Minster's ancient towers, where kings have been crowned and queens have prayed for over 1,000 years, a secret had been carefully guarded for months. Behind closed doors, skilled hands have been carving stone, shaping metal, and breathing life into what would become the most significant tribute to a monarch who had served for 70 years. The whispers among the cathedral staff spoke of something extraordinary, something that would capture not just the likeness of Queen Elizabeth II, but the very essence of her reign. As autumn leaves danced around the Gothic spires, King Charles III stood before the covered monument, his hands trembling slightly, not from a Yorkshire wind, but from the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another royal ceremony. This was a son honoring his mother, a king paying tribute to his predecessor, and a nation saying farewell to an era that had defined generations. What lay beneath that ceremonial cloth would soon become more than just carved stone and polished bronze. It would become a pilgrimage site, a place where grief and gratitude would merge, where the past and future of the British monarchy would meet in silent conversation. But the journey to this moment had been anything but simple, and the story behind the statue held secrets that would surprise even those who thought they knew everything about the royal family. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of York Minster as Dean of York. Dr. Jonathan Frost received a phone call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday in late September 2022, just weeks after Queen Elizabeth II had passed away peacefully at Balmoral Castle. The voice on the other end belonged to Sir Clive Alderton, King Charles III private secretary, and his words carried the weight of royal tradition mixed with personal grief. "The king wishes to commission something special," Sir Clive explained, his usually composed voice betraying a hint of emotion. "Something that will honor her late Majesty's connection to Yorkshire and the people she served for 7 decades. We're thinking of York Minster as the location." Dr. Frost, a man who had spent 15 years managing the affairs of England's largest Gothic cathedral, felt his heart skip a beat. York Minster had always held a special place in the Queen's heart. She had visited 17 times during her reign, each visit leaving lasting memories etched in the cathedral's extensive archives. Her first visit as Princess Elizabeth in 1949 had been captured in faded photographs that still hung in the chapter house, showing a young woman of 23, radiant and full of hope for the future. The Dean recalled his own encounters with the Queen during her final visit to York in 2012 for the Diamond Jubilee celebrations. She had walked slowly through the cathedral, her hand trailing along the ancient stone columns as if drawing strength from their permanence. During that visit, she had paused before the great west window and remarked to him, "These walls have witnessed so much history, Dean Frost. I wonder what stories they would tell if they could speak." Now, those same walls would witness the creation of something unprecedented, a permanent memorial that would capture not just the Queen's image, but her spirit and her unwavering dedication to service. Sir Clive continued explaining that King Charles wanted the project to be handled with absolute secrecy until completion. The new monarch was still navigating the complex emotions of his new role while grieving the loss of his mother, and he wanted this tribute to be perfect. "His Majesty has specific requirements," Sir Clive noted. "The memorial should reflect her late Majesty's connection to ordinary people, her faith, and her role as head of the Commonwealth. It should be accessible to all visitors, regardless of their background or beliefs." Dr. Frost immediately understood the magnitude of the task. This wasn't just about creating another royal statue. It was about capturing the essence of a woman who had touched millions of lives across the globe. The Queen had been many things to many people: a mother figure to her subjects, a symbol of stability during turbulent times, a beacon of Christian faith, and a bridge between Britain's imperial past and its modern multicultural present. The cathedral's master mason, Robert Williams, was called into an emergency meeting the following day. Williams, a third-generation stone carver whose grandfather had worked on the Minster's restoration after the 1984 fire, brought with him decades of experience in creating meaningful memorials. His weathered hands had shaped countless tributes over the years, but nothing had prepared him for this commission. "We need to think about this differently," Williams explained to the hastily assembled committee that included Dr. Frost, the cathedral's head of conservation, and 2 representatives from the royal household. A traditional statue might seem too formal, too distant. Her Majesty was known for her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Whatever we create needs to reflect that warmth and accessibility. The initial discussions were both exciting and daunting. The committee spent hours reviewing photographs, videos, and written accounts of the Queen's interactions with Yorkshire communities over the decades. They studied her body language, her facial expressions, and the way she carried herself in different situations. They wanted to capture not just her physical appearance, but the essence of her character, the slight smile that could put nervous children at ease, the attentive posture she maintained during countless official functions, and the genuine interest she showed in the lives of ordinary people. Lady Margaret Thornton, a local historian and longtime royal correspondent, was brought in to provide additional context. Her extensive research into the Queen's Yorkshire connections revealed fascinating details that would influence the memorial's design. The Queen had opened hospitals, schools, and community centers across the county. She had comforted families during times of tragedy, including her visits to Sheffield after the Hillsborough disaster and to York following various floods that had devastated the region. Her Majesty always understood that monarchy was about service, not privilege, Lady Margaret observed during one of the planning sessions. She visited Yorkshire communities. She didn't just go through the motions. She listened, she remembered names and faces, and she genuinely cared about the challenges people faced. The committee decided that the memorial should be positioned in the nave, where it would be accessible to all visitors rather than hidden away in a side chapel reserved for VIPs. This decision reflected the Queen's own democratic instincts and her belief that the monarchy belonged to all the people, not just the elite. Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, blessed the project during a private ceremony attended only by the core planning committee. His words carried special significance. "We're not just creating a monument to a queen, but to a woman of deep faith who understood that true leadership comes from serving others. May this memorial inspire future generations to follow her example of selfless dedication." As autumn turned to winter, detailed sketches began taking shape. The chosen artist, Dame Sarah Morrison, was a sculptor renowned for her ability to capture both physical likeness and emotional depth in her work. Her previous commissions included memorials to Nelson Mandela and Mother Teresa, works that had been praised for their ability to convey both strength and compassion. Dame Sarah spent weeks studying archival footage and photographs, particularly focusing on moments when the Queen interacted with Yorkshire communities. She paid special attention to a 1977 photograph showing the Queen kneeling to speak with a young boy in a wheelchair during her Silver Jubilee tour of Leeds. The image captured something essential about the monarch's character: her willingness to literally lower herself to meet people at their level. The sculptor also studied the Queen's hands, which she considered particularly expressive. These hands had signed countless documents, waved to millions of people, comforted grieving families, and held the symbols of office during state ceremonies. They told the story of a life dedicated to duty and service. Working from her studio in the Cotswolds, Dame Sarah created multiple clay models, each capturing different aspects of the Queen's personality. One showed her in formal regalia, another depicted her during a walkabout, engaging warmly with members of the public. The final model would need to balance dignity with approachability, majesty with humanity. King Charles reviewed the preliminary designs during a private meeting at Clarence House. Those present described his reaction as deeply emotional. He studied each model carefully, his trained eye honed by years of architectural and artistic interests, noting every detail. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "This captures something essential about my mother," he said, pointing to the model that showed the queen in a moment of genuine engagement with an unseen companion. She was never more herself than when she was with her people, listening to their stories, sharing in their joys and sorrows. The king's approval came with additional personal touches. He requested that the memorial include subtle references to the queen's love of horses and dogs, her passion for the Commonwealth, and her deep Christian faith. These elements would need to be woven into the design without overwhelming the central figure or making the piece too cluttered. As 2022 drew to a close, the secret project was well underway. The stone had been selected, a beautiful piece of Yorkshire limestone that would weather naturally and blend with the cathedral's existing architecture. The bronze elements were being cast in a foundry in Wales, using traditional techniques that had remained unchanged for centuries. Security around the project was unprecedented. Workers signed confidentiality agreements, and access to the workshop was strictly controlled. Even the cathedral staff were told only that restoration work was taking place in the closed section of the building. The cover story was believable. York Minster was always undergoing some form of maintenance or improvement. Local media occasionally speculated about the unusual activity around the cathedral, but their inquiries were deflected with vague references to routine maintenance and conservation work. The secret was holding, but the pressure was building as the completion date approached, and plans for the unveiling ceremony began to take shape. The winter months proved challenging for the craftsmen working on the memorial. The unheated workshop spaces were bitterly cold, and the intricate detail work required steady hands and perfect lighting conditions. Yet everyone involved felt they were part of something historic, something that would outlast them all and serve as a permanent reminder of a remarkable reign. As the first drafts of the unveiling ceremony began circulating among royal planners, it became clear that this would be more than just another royal engagement. It would be King Charles's most significant public act as monarch, a moment when he would honor his mother's memory while stepping fully into his own role as head of the royal family and the Church of England. The stage was set for what would become one of the most moving royal ceremonies in recent memory. But the true test would come when the memorial was finally revealed to the public, and they could judge whether the months of secret planning and careful craftsmanship had succeeded in capturing the essence of a woman who had defined an era that the workshop tucked away behind York Minster's chapter house hummed with quiet intensity as Dame Sarah Morrison made her final adjustments to what would become the Queen's eternal portrait in stone and bronze. January 2023 brought bitter Yorkshire winds, but inside the heated workspace, skilled craftsmen from across Britain labored over every detail with the precision of medieval cathedral builders. Master stonemason Robert Williams ran his weathered fingers across the limestone base, feeling for any imperfection that might mar the memorial's foundation. The Yorkshire limestone had been quarried from the same site that provided stone for parts of the original cathedral 8 centuries earlier. This connection to the Minster's ancient past felt appropriate for a memorial to a monarch whose reign had spanned nearly a third of the cathedral's existence. Each grain of this stone has witnessed history, Williams murmured to his apprentice, young James Fletcher, who had traveled from London specifically to work on this project. The Queen herself might have touched stone from this very quarry during her visits here. We're not just carving a memorial. We're continuing a story that began before any of us were born. Dame Sarah had chosen to depict the Queen in a moment of gentle engagement, her figure slightly leaning forward as if listening intently to someone speaking to her. The pose was inspired by countless photographs and video footage of the monarch during her Yorkshire visits, particularly a moment captured during her 1987 visit to a Bradford community center where she had spent 20 minutes talking with elderly residents about their wartime experiences. The sculptor's attention to detail bordered on obsession. She had studied the way fabric draped across the Queen's shoulders during different seasons, how her posture changed subtly as she aged, and even how her expression varied when she was genuinely interested in a conversation versus when she was maintaining polite attention during more formal occasions. Working in clay before transferring to stone and bronze, Dame Sarah had captured something remarkable in the queen's face, an expression of serene attentiveness that seemed to invite conversation. The slight upturn at the corners of her mouth suggested warmth without appearing casual, while her eyes held the kind of focused attention that had made millions of people feel, even briefly, that they were the most important person in the room. The challenge, Dame Sarah explained to the small team of craftsmen, is making her appear both timeless and immediate. She needs to be recognizably the queen we all knew, but also someone who seems approachable to a child visiting the cathedral for the first time or an elderly person seeking comfort in their faith. The bronze elements of the memorial required different expertise altogether. Master metalworker David Chun, whose family had been casting bronze in Wales for 4 generations, supervised the creation of the queen's hands and the subtle decorative elements that would adorn the memorial. The hands proved particularly challenging. They needed to convey both strength and gentleness, authority and compassion. Chun spent weeks studying photographs of the queen's hands throughout her reign. As a young princess, they had been smooth and elegant. By the time of her Diamond Jubilee, they showed the natural aging process, but remained steady and graceful. The bronze hands on the memorial captured this evolution, showing hands that had clearly lived a long life dedicated to service, but retained an essential dignity and grace. The decorative elements woven into the memorial's design told the story of the Queen's connection to Yorkshire and the broader Commonwealth. Subtle relief carvings in the limestone base depicted Yorkshire roses intertwined with symbols representing the Commonwealth nations. A small corgi, barely noticeable unless one looked carefully, sat at the base of the memorial, a private joke that would delight those who discovered it and a tribute to the Queen's lifelong love of her canine companions. Religious symbolism was incorporated with careful consideration for the cathedral setting and the Queen's role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England. A barely visible cross was worked into the pattern of the Queen's dress, while the memorial's positioning allowed natural light from the great east window to illuminate the figure at certain times of day, creating an almost ethereal effect. Dr. Frost visited the workshop daily, watching the memorial take shape with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The Dean understood that this piece would likely become one of York Minster's most visited and photographed attractions, joining the medieval architecture and stained glass as defining features of the cathedral's identity. Every detail matters, he reminded the craftsmen during one of his visits. This memorial will be studied and appreciated by visitors from around the world for generations to come. It needs to honor not just the Queen's memory, but also the tradition of craftsmanship that has made this cathedral a masterpiece. King Charles visited the workshop twice during the creation process, always arriving unannounced and accompanied only by his protection officers and Sir Clive Alderton. During his second visit in March 2023, he spent over an hour examining the nearly complete memorial, asking detailed questions about materials, techniques, and artistic choices. The king's background in architecture and his lifelong interest in traditional crafts made him an informed observer. He noted the way the limestone would weather naturally over time, gradually blending even more seamlessly with the cathedral's existing stonework. He approved of the subtle Commonwealth symbols, particularly appreciating how they honored his mother's role as head of the Commonwealth without overwhelming the memorial's primary focus. She would have loved this, the king said quietly, his voice barely audible above the workshop's ambient noise. The craftsmanship, the attention to tradition, the way it invites people to approach rather than just observe from a distance. This captures something essential about how she saw her role. Dame Sarah had incorporated one particularly innovative element that wouldn't be immediately obvious to casual observers. The memorial was designed so that natural acoustics would cause conversations near it to be slightly amplified for the speaker while remaining private from others in the cathedral. This effect, created through careful shaping of the stone surfaces, meant that people could speak to or about the Queen in slightly hushed tones and feel genuinely heard, as if she were listening to their words. The final stages of creation proved most challenging. Every surface had to be perfect, every detail precisely executed. The bronze elements were polished to a subtle sheen that would develop a natural patina over time, while the limestone was finished to complement the cathedral's existing stonework without appearing artificially aged. Master Williams worked 18-hour days during the final weeks, personally overseeing every aspect of the installation process. The memorial had to be moved into the cathedral in sections during overnight hours to maintain secrecy, then assembled in its permanent location with precision that would make any adjustment unnecessary once completed. The inscription proved another challenge entirely. Multiple versions were drafted and redrafted before settling on words that captured the Queen's significance without being overly sentimental or grandiose. The final text, carved in elegant lettering that complemented the cathedral's medieval inscriptions, read simply, Elizabeth Regina II, in grateful memory of a life devoted to service, 1926 to 2022. Additional text in smaller lettering noted her role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England and Head of the Commonwealth, while a separate plaque would eventually detail her connections to Yorkshire and her 17 visits to York Minster. The simplicity of the main inscription reflected the Queen's own preference for understated dignity over elaborate tribute. Security during the final installation phase reached extraordinary levels. The cathedral was closed to all but essential personnel for 3 days while the memorial was positioned and the surrounding area prepared for the unveiling ceremony. Even longtime cathedral staff were restricted from the nave during this period, adding to the sense of anticipation and mystery surrounding the project. Local media coverage intensified as the unusual security measures and restricted access to parts of the cathedral sparked speculation. Official statements continued to reference routine conservation work, but veteran royal correspondents began suspecting something significant was being prepared. The proximity to what would have been the Queen's 97th birthday on April 21st only added to the speculation. Dame Sarah made her final adjustments to the memorial during emotional private ceremony attended only by the core team that had worked on the project. Dean Frost offered a brief blessing, while the craftsmen who had devoted months to perfecting every detail stood in silent appreciation of what they had accomplished together. "We have created something that will outlive us all," Dame Sarah told the assembled group. "Long after we are gone, people will come to this place to remember a remarkable woman and a transformative reign. We have been privileged to play a part in ensuring that her legacy endures in stone and bronze for centuries to come." The covered memorial stood in the nave like a mysterious presence, its draped form giving no hint of the masterpiece beneath. Cathedral staff walking past during their daily routines often paused, sensing something significant about the shrouded figure, but unable to guess what lay hidden beneath the ceremonial cloth. As April approached and final preparations for the unveiling ceremony began, the secret that had been carefully guarded for 7 months was about to be revealed to the world. The memorial was ready, but the true test would come when King Charles drew back the covering and the public saw for the first time how artists and craftsmen had chosen to remember their beloved queen. The stage was set for a ceremony that would mark not just the unveiling of a memorial, but a moment of national reflection on a reign that had defined an era and a woman whose influence extended far beyond the boundaries of her realm. The morning of April 18th, 2023, dawned gray and misty across Yorkshire, but inside the walls of York Minster, preparations for the memorial unveiling ceremony buzzed with the controlled urgency that marked major royal events. Sir Clive Alderton arrived at the cathedral before sunrise, his breath visible in the cold air as he conducted a final security walkthrough with the protection officers who had been planning this event for weeks. The ceremony, scheduled for 2 days before what would have been the Queen's 97th birthday, had evolved from a simple unveiling into something approaching a state occasion. The guest list, initially intended to include only senior clergy and local dignitaries, had expanded to accommodate representatives from across the Commonwealth, former prime ministers, and members of the extended royal family. Inside the chapter house, which had been transformed into a temporary command center, protocol officers worked through final arrangements with the precision of military planners. Every aspect of the ceremony had been choreographed down to the smallest detail, from the exact angle at which King Charles would approach the memorial to the timing of the organ music that would accompany the unveiling moment. Dame Patricia Williams, the former Crown Equerry who now served as a senior protocol advisor, reviewed the ceremonial order for the 20th time that morning. Her decades of experience organizing royal events had taught her that successful ceremonies appeared effortless to observers, but required exhaustive planning behind the scenes. "The king will approach the memorial from the Great West Door," she explained to the assembled team of officials, cathedral staff, and security personnel. "He will pause for exactly 30 seconds before the cover memorial to allow photographers to capture the moment of anticipation. The dean will offer a brief blessing. Then His Majesty will draw back the covering in a single, smooth motion." The covering itself had been specially designed for this moment. Made from white silk interwoven with gold thread, it had been created by the same workshop that produced coronation robes and state banquet linens for the royal household. The fabric would be preserved after the ceremony and eventually displayed in the cathedral's museum as part of the memorial's historical record. Media attention for the event had intensified dramatically in the days leading up to the ceremony. Royal correspondents from around the world had descended on York, turning the medieval city into a temporary hub of international journalism. The BBC had negotiated exclusive broadcasting rights for the ceremony itself, while photographers were restricted to designated positions that wouldn't interfere with the solemnity of the occasion. Local reaction to the upcoming ceremony revealed the deep emotional connection many Yorkshire residents felt to both the Queen and the royal family. Margaret Thompson, an 84-year-old retired teacher from York, had waited outside the cathedral for 3 hours hoping to catch a glimpse of the preparations. She had met the Queen twice, once during a school visit in 1965 and again during the Diamond Jubilee celebrations in 2012. She always remembered Yorkshire fondly, Mrs. Thompson told reporters gathered outside the cathedral. Every time she came here, you could see how much she enjoyed talking with ordinary people. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when there were hundreds of people around. Similar sentiments echoed throughout the crowds gathering in the city center. The memorial had clearly touched something deep in the public consciousness, representing not just remembrance of a beloved monarch, but a way of processing the collective grief that had followed her death 8 months earlier. Archbishop Stephen Cottrell, who would deliver the main address during the ceremony, spent the morning in quiet prayer and reflection. His sermon had been written and rewritten multiple times as he struggled to capture both the Queen's personal faith and her public significance. The final version would focus on her understanding of service as a form of worship and her belief that leadership meant serving others rather than being served by them. She understood that true authority comes from love rather than power, the Archbishop had written in his notes. Her Majesty showed us that the greatest leaders are those who dedicate their lives to lifting others up rather than elevating themselves. King Charles arrived at York Minster at precisely 10:30 a.m., his dark suit and black tie reflecting the somber nature of the occasion, while avoiding the formal military uniform that might have seemed inappropriate for a memorial service. The king appeared composed, but visibly moved as he was escorted through the cathedral to view the covered memorial for the final time before the public unveiling. Those close to the king describe his state of mind as complex and emotional. This ceremony represented his most significant public act, as monarch focused entirely on honoring his mother's memory. Unlike the state funeral or the coronation ceremonies that have been defined by centuries of tradition, this memorial was personal, a son's tribute to his mother, created according to his vision and preferences. The guest list reflected this personal dimension while acknowledging the Queen's public significance. Former Prime Ministers Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Theresa May, and Boris Johnson were all present, representing the political leadership she had worked with throughout her reign. Commonwealth High Commissioners occupied a special section near the memorial, emphasizing the Queen's role as head of the Commonwealth and her particular commitment to that unique association of nations. Representatives from the Queen's favorite charities were also present, including officials from the NSBCC, Save the Children, and Barnardo's organization she had supported for decades, and which reflected her particular concern for children's welfare. Their presence served as a reminder that the Queen's influence extended far beyond constitutional duties to encompass direct support for causes she believed could make real differences in people's lives. Local dignitaries from across Yorkshire filled additional seats, including mayors, council leaders, and representatives from communities the Queen had visited during her 17 trips to the county. Their presence emphasized the memorial's location and the special relationship between the monarchy and the region that had always welcomed royal visits with particular warmth. As the ceremony's start time approached, the cathedral's great bells began tolling. Not the celebratory peals that marked royal celebrations, but the measured, solemn tones appropriate for a memorial service. The sound echoed across York's ancient streets, drawing residents and visitors to stop and reflect on the significance of the moment about to unfold. Inside the cathedral, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and emotion. The covered memorial dominated the nave, its mysterious form drawing all attention and creating a focal point for the complex feelings of loss, gratitude, and hope that the Queen's death had evoked in millions of people around the world. Dean Jonathan Frost took his position near the memorial, holding the order of service that had been printed on paper made from renewable materials, a small but meaningful nod to the King's environmental concerns and his mother's increasing interest in conservation issues during her later years. The Dean's words would be brief but carefully chosen, emphasizing themes of service, faith, and continuity that had defined the Queen's approach to her role. The cathedral's choir, composed of both professional singers and local volunteers, had rehearsed for weeks to perfect their performance of hymns and anthems selected personally by King Charles. The music included "The Lord is My Shepherd," which had been sung at the Queen's wedding in 1947, and "Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer," which she had requested for her Golden Jubilee service in 2002. Security throughout the cathedral was comprehensive but discreet, with protection officers positioned to ensure safety without creating an atmosphere of fear or intimidation. The approach reflected the Queen's own preference for accessible monarchy and the memorial's intended role as a place where ordinary visitors could come to pay their respects without feeling excluded or unwelcome. As the final guests took their seats and the ceremonial participants moved into position, the weight of history seemed to settle over York Minster like a tangible presence. This ancient cathedral had witnessed the baptism of kings, the marriage of princes, and the funeral services of nobles spanning nearly a millennium. Now, it would host the unveiling of what many expected to become one of the most visited and beloved royal memorials in Britain. The moment of revelation was approaching, but the true significance of what lay beneath that silk covering would only become apparent when King Charles finally drew back the fabric, and the world saw how artists and craftsmen had chosen to remember a woman who had touched countless lives during her 70-year reign. Outside the cathedral, crowds gathered in the streets despite the ceremony being by invitation only. They came not to see the memorial itself, but to be present in the city during this historic moment, to share in the collective experience of honoring a monarch who had been a constant presence throughout their lives. The stage was set for a ceremony that would mark not just the unveiling of a work of art, but a moment of national and international reflection on leadership, service, and the enduring power of quiet dedication to duty. In minutes, the world would see how a king had chosen to honor his mother, and how a nation had decided to remember its longest reigning monarch. At exactly 11:30 a.m., the great organ of York Minster fell silent, and 800 guests rose to their feet as King Charles III entered the cathedral through the Great West Door. The king walked alone down the nave's central aisle, his footsteps echoing against stone walls that had witnessed 9 centuries of British history. Behind him, members of the royal family followed in order of precedence, their faces reflecting the solemn dignity of the occasion. Princess and the Queen's only daughter walked with the measured pace that had characterized her approach to royal duties throughout her life. Her presence carried particular significance, as she had been with their mother during her final hours at Balmoral and had accompanied the Queen's coffin throughout the elaborate funeral proceedings. Today, she came not as the Princess Royal fulfilling official duties, but as a daughter honoring her mother's memory. Prince William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales, represented the monarchy's future while participating in this commemoration of its past. Their children had remained at school, a decision that reflected both security considerations and the recognition that this ceremony was primarily for reflection rather than celebration. The absence of the younger generation somehow emphasized the weight of the moment and the passage of time that the memorial would mark for generations to come. Dean Jonathan Frost stood beside the covered memorial, his vestments catching the filtered light streaming through the cathedral's medieval stained glass windows. The covering itself seemed to glow in the soft illumination, its white silk and gold threads creating an almost ethereal presence in the ancient nave. Around the memorial, arrangements of white lilies and yellow roses, flowers personally chosen by King Charles to represent purity and Yorkshire respectively, added subtle color to the solemn scene. As the king approached the memorial, the weight of the moment became evident in his deliberate pace and the careful control of his expression. Those close enough to observe noted the slight tremor in his hands and the way he paused for a moment longer than protocol required before taking his position beside the shrouded figure. This was clearly more than a ceremonial duty for him. It was a deeply personal act of love and remembrance. Archbishop Stephen Cottrell stepped forward to deliver his address, his voice carrying clearly throughout the cathedral without amplification. The Archbishop had chosen his words carefully, seeking to capture both the Queen's personal faith and her public significance while avoiding either excessive sentimentality or cold formality. We gather today not merely to unveil a memorial, but to reflect on a life that demonstrated the transformative power of faithful service. The Archbishop began. Her late Majesty understood that true leadership is not about commanding others, but about inspiring them through example. She showed us that the greatest authority comes not from power, but from love freely given in service of others. The Archbishop's words resonated through the cathedral with particular power because of the setting. York Minster had been the site of numerous royal ceremonies over the centuries, but this memorial represented something unique, a permanent reminder of personal devotion transcending official duty. The Queen's relationship with this cathedral had been built through decades of visits, each one reinforcing her connection to the people of Yorkshire and her commitment to understanding their lives and concerns. In this place where she worshipped and prayed, where she met with citizens from all walks of life and listened to their hopes and concerns, we remember a woman who understood that monarchy is not about privilege, but about responsibility. The Archbishop continued. She taught us that the highest calling is to serve others, particularly those who cannot fully advocate for themselves. Throughout the congregation, the impact of these words was visible in the faces of those present. Former prime ministers who had experienced the Queen's Council during their own moments of crisis and decision nodded in recognition of truths they had discovered during their private audiences with the monarch. Commonwealth representatives reflected on her unique ability to bridge cultural and political differences through personal relationships built on mutual respect and genuine interest in their nation's welfare. Local dignitaries from Yorkshire communities the Queen had visited over 7 decades found themselves remembering specific moments when her presence had brought comfort during difficult times or celebration during moments of achievement. The memorial's location in York Minster was particularly meaningful because it represented the Queen at her most accessible and human, not the formal monarch of state occasions, but the interested visitor who remembered names and faces and followed up on community projects she had seen during previous visits. When the Archbishop concluded his address, and stepped back, an almost palpable sense of anticipation filled the cathedral. King Charles moved closer to the memorial, his hand reaching toward the silk covering that had concealed months of artistic labor and emotional investment. The moment seemed suspended in time, as if the entire cathedral was holding its breath. The king's gesture, when it came, was both gentle and decisive. He grasped the corner of the covering and drew it away in a single, smooth motion that revealed the memorial in its entirety. The collective intake of breath from the congregation was audible throughout the cathedral as they saw for the first time how Dame Sarah Morrison and her team of craftsmen had chosen to remember their queen. The memorial exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. The queen appeared as if engaged in intimate conversation, her figure leaning slightly forward with an expression of genuine interest and compassion. The limestone and bronze had been combined masterfully to create something that was clearly recognizable as the monarch millions had known and loved, yet also timelessly elegant and approachable. The craftsmanship was immediately apparent, even from a distance. The way natural light played across the bronze elements created subtle shadows that gave depth and life to the queen's face. Her hands, positioned as if she had just been speaking or was about to respond to someone's comment, conveyed both strength and gentleness. The subtle symbols worked into the memorial's base, the Yorkshire roses, Commonwealth emblems, and nearly hidden corgi would provide discoveries for future visitors without overwhelming the central figure. King Charles stood motionless for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the memorial with an expression that combined grief, pride, and something approaching awe. Later, those close to him would describe his reaction as profoundly moving. This was clearly a man seeing his mother as he remembered her best, engaged with the people she had devoted her life to serving. Princess Anne approached the memorial and placed her hand briefly on the limestone base, a gesture that seemed both spontaneous and deeply personal. Other members of the royal family followed, each spending a few moments in private contemplation before the figure that would now represent their family matriarch for generations to come. The cathedral's choir began singing "How Great Thou Art," one of the Queen's favorite hymns, and the sound seemed to release the emotional tension that had built throughout the ceremony. Many in the congregation wept openly, not from sadness alone, but from a complex mixture of grief, gratitude, and recognition that they were witnessing something historically significant. Former Prime Minister John Major, who had worked closely with the Queen during some of the monarchy's most challenging periods in the 1990s, later described the unveiling as a perfect tribute to an extraordinary woman. His sentiment was echoed by officials from around the Commonwealth, who saw in the memorial not just artistic achievement, but a faithful representation of the monarch they had known through decades of personal interaction. The memorial's immediate impact on those present was evident in their faces and body language. This was clearly not just another royal statue, but something that had successfully captured the essence of the Queen's character and approach to her role. The figure seemed to invite conversation rather than demand reverence, reflecting the Queen's own ability to put people at ease regardless of their background or the formal nature of the occasion. As the ceremony concluded and guests began filing past the memorial for closer examination, the full sophistication of Dame Sarah Morrison's artistic vision became apparent. From different angles, the Queen's expression seemed to change subtly, sometimes appearing more formal and regal, other times more maternal and approachable. This chameleon-like quality perfectly reflected the many roles she had balanced throughout her reign. The Dean's closing blessing emphasized themes of continuity and inspiration. May this memorial serve not as an ending, but as a beginning, inspiring all who see it to consider how they might serve others with the same dedication and grace that characterized her late Majesty's remarkable life. As King Charles made his final approach to the memorial before leaving the cathedral, he paused once more, his hand touching the bronze briefly in what appeared to be both farewell and promise. The gesture suggested that this memorial represented not just memory, but commitment, a pledge to continue the work his mother had begun and to honor the example she had set. The unveiling ceremony had succeeded in its primary goal of creating a fitting tribute to the Queen's memory, but it had also accomplished something more significant. It had provided a focal point for national and international reflection on leadership, service, and the enduring power of personal example. The memorial would now become a place of pilgrimage, where visitors could come to remember not just a monarch, but a way of being in the world that emphasized duty, compassion, and unwavering commitment to others. Within hours of the unveiling ceremony's conclusion, York Minster experienced something unprecedented in its 900-year history. Visitors began arriving in numbers that exceeded even Christmas and Easter attendance, drawn by news coverage of the memorial and word-of-mouth descriptions of its remarkable artistic achievement. By evening on April 18th, a steady stream of people wound through the cathedral's nave, each seeking their own moment of connection with the Queen's memory. Margaret Thompson, the elderly retired teacher who had waited hours outside the cathedral before the ceremony, was among the first members of the public to view the memorial up close. Her reaction, captured by photographers and widely shared on social media, became iconic of the public response. Standing before the limestone and bronze figure, she spoke quietly to the memorial as if the Queen were actually present, sharing memories of their brief encounters decades earlier. "She looks just as I remember her," Mrs. Thompson told reporters afterward, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Not the formal Queen from official portraits, but the woman who took time to ask about my students and remembered their names when she visited the school again years later. This captures something real about who she was." Similar scenes played out throughout that first day as visitors discovered the memorial's unique power to evoke personal memories and emotional connections. The artistic decision to depict the Queen in a moment of engaged listening proved inspired, as people found themselves naturally drawn to speak to the figure, sharing thoughts, memories, and even current concerns as if seeking the monarch's counsel one final time. Cathedral staff quickly realized they needed to adjust their normal procedures to accommodate the unprecedented interest. Dean Jonathan Frost authorized extended opening hours and additional security personnel to manage the crowds safely while preserving the cathedral's atmosphere of reverence and reflection. The memorial area was cordoned off to prevent damage while still allowing close viewing, and additional seating was arranged nearby for visitors who wanted to spend extended time in contemplation. Social media response to the memorial proved overwhelming in its positivity and emotional depth. Photographs and videos shared by visitors were accompanied by personal stories about encounters with the Queen, memories of watching her on television during significant national moments, and reflections on what her reign had meant to them personally. The hashtag Queen Elizabeth Memorial began trending globally within 6 hours of the unveiling. International visitors began arriving within days, many traveling specifically to see the memorial. Flight bookings to Manchester and Leeds airports showed unusual spikes for late April, with travel agents reporting requests for York-specific itineraries from visitors across the Commonwealth and beyond. Hotels in the city quickly filled to capacity, creating an unexpected economic boost that local officials hadn't anticipated. The memorial's impact on other Commonwealth nations became evident through diplomatic channels and official visits. High commissioners from Australia, Canada, and New Zealand requested private viewings for their staff and visiting dignitaries. The Australian government announced plans to commission a replica for display in Parliament House in Canberra, while Canadian officials explored the possibility of creating a sister memorial for display in Ottawa's Parliament Hill. Dame Sarah Morrison found herself inundated with requests for interviews and commissions as the memorial's artistic success became internationally recognized. Art critics praised the work's ability to transcend traditional royal portraiture by capturing character rather than mere likeness. The Royal Academy of Arts announced plans to acquire preparatory sketches and models for their permanent collection, recognizing the memorial as a significant achievement in contemporary British sculpture. King Charles returned to view the memorial privately 2 weeks after the unveiling, accompanied only by his protection officers and Sir Clive Alderton. Cathedral staff who observed his second visit described his demeanor as more relaxed and content than during the formal ceremony. He spent nearly an hour in the cathedral, sometimes standing before the memorial in quiet contemplation, other times walking around it to view Dame Sarah's work from different angles. During this private visit, the king was overheard speaking to the memorial in quiet tones, though staff respectfully maintained distance and couldn't discern his words. Those familiar with the royal family's private relationships suggested this represented a continuation of conversations between mother and son that had shaped both their lives, now transformed into a one-sided dialogue that nonetheless seemed to provide comfort and connection. The memorial's influence extended beyond individual visitors to inspire broader cultural and artistic responses. Yorkshire poets began composing works inspired by the Queen's connection to the county, while local musicians wrote compositions intended for performance in the cathedral near the memorial. The University of York announced plans for an annual lecture series on public service and leadership to be delivered in the cathedral's chapter house near the memorial site. Educational visits from schools across Britain became a regular feature of the memorial's impact. Teachers found the figure particularly valuable for discussions about leadership, service, and the relationship between personal character and public responsibility. Students from diverse backgrounds seemed to connect with the memorial's approachable dignity, seeing in it an example of authority exercised through service rather than dominance. The memorial also sparked renewed interest in the Queen's specific connections to Yorkshire throughout her reign. Local historians compiled comprehensive records of her 17 visits to the county, creating detailed accounts of her interactions with communities from Sheffield to Scarborough. These records, displayed in the cathedral's visitor center, provided context for the memorial while celebrating the deep relationship between the monarchy and ordinary Yorkshire residents. Unexpected discoveries about the memorial continued to emerge as visitors spent time studying its details. Art experts noted that the bronze elements actually changed color subtly throughout the day as natural light conditions shifted, creating an almost living quality to the Queen's appearance. The acoustic properties Dame Sarah had incorporated proved even more sophisticated than originally planned, allowing whispered conversations near the memorial to be clearly heard while remaining private from other areas of the cathedral. Religious leaders from various denominations praised the memorial's success in creating a space for reflection that welcomed people regardless of their specific beliefs. The Queen's role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England was acknowledged through the cathedral's setting and subtle Christian symbolism, but the memorial's primary focus on character and service resonated with visitors from all faith traditions and none. 6 months after the unveiling, York Minster reported that visitor numbers had increased by 40% over previous years, with the memorial being cited as the primary attraction for most additional visitors. This surge provided resources for ongoing conservation work throughout the cathedral while creating employment opportunities in York's tourism sector. Local businesses, from hotels to restaurants to gift shops, reported significant increases in revenue directly attributable to memorial-related tourism. The memorial's influence on royal protocol and future commemorative projects became evident as other institutions sought to emulate its success. Buckingham Palace announced that future royal memorials would emphasize character and personal connection over formal grandeur, citing the York Minster Memorial as a new standard for royal commemoration. The approach would influence memorial projects for other senior royals, fundamentally changing how the monarchy chose to remember and honor its members. Anniversary observances of the Queen's death each September now center around the memorial, with special services and events drawing visitors from around the world. These gatherings have evolved into celebrations of service and citizenship rather than formal mourning, reflecting the memorial's power to inspire rather than merely commemorate. Perhaps most significantly, The memorial succeeded in its original goal of making the Queen's memory accessible to all visitors regardless of their background or circumstances. Children who never knew the Queen during her lifetime found themselves drawn to the figure's gentle expression and approachable posture. Elderly visitors who had lived through her entire reign discovered in the memorial a fitting representation of the constant presence she had provided throughout their lives. As the second anniversary of the unveiling approaches, the memorial has become integral to York Minster's identity and Britain's landscape of royal commemoration. What began as King Charles's personal tribute to his mother has evolved into something larger, a place where the values of service, duty, and compassion are made visible in stone and bronze, inspiring visitors to consider how they might apply these principles in their own lives. The success of the Queen Elizabeth II Memorial at York Minster demonstrates the enduring power of thoughtful artistry combined with genuine emotion. Dame Sarah Morrison and her team of craftsmen created more than a statue. They crafted a bridge between memory and inspiration, between personal grief and public celebration, between the end of one remarkable reign and the continuing evolution of constitutional monarchy. Standing in York Minster's nave, the memorial represents the Queen as she would have wished to be remembered, not as a distant figure of authority, but as someone who listened with genuine interest to the concerns and joys of ordinary people, who understood that true leadership means service, and who believed that the greatest privilege of her position was the opportunity to make positive differences in the lives of others. In achieving this representation, the memorial ensures that her example will continue inspiring future generations long after those who knew her personally have passed into history themselves.